to me, the hard part that I'm trying to understand and figure out is, as a publisher, right, just hearing everything we just talked about, one key thought comes to my mind, which is I'm really ultimately trying to serve the advertiser. Okay? Like, I want business outcomes. I want them to realize...
Sorry, who are you in this situation?
The publisher.
Okay.
As the publisher.
Is that what publishers want? Yeah, I think there's a lot that's happening here, and I think most DSPs would be reluctant to sort of acknowledge this. But the reality is, in most DSPs, we're like approaching emergency territory regarding bid stream management. And I think, if you rewind the clocks 10 years, header bidding starts to become a thing. DSP's like, is this good for us? Is this bad for us? Like, we don't know. And then QPS volume keeps growing, and you had press releases for a while, like, we're operating at 2 million QPS, 5 million QPS. And that seemed like strong and impressive, and actually turned out to be like a really significant weakness in terms of the operating economics of running a DSP. And so we're clear, the market conditions would clearly indicate that DSPs know they have a QPS problem because nobody listens to the whole bid stream. They can't afford to listen to the whole bid stream. And so there clearly is an acknowledgement on the buy side of the market that like we have to manage QPS. And then I think privately, what I hear from a lot of DSPs is imposing a QPS cap on our SSP partners is the easy sort of like band-aid to this problem, but it's actually creating a lot of other problems for us. And I think it comes back to this traffic shaping thing. And I think what these DSPs are saying is we keep seeing more and more duplication for a smaller and smaller cross-section of supply. We see a ton of duplicate requests for impressions that the SSPs think we're going to buy. They all figured out the kinds of impressions we're going to buy, and so they send us a ton of duplication for that. And so, for example, when we onboard a new customer who has a very different buying pattern from the rest of our customer base, we fail every time because we don't get access to the inventory that marketer wants. If we, like the easy example is like if we serve a US audience and we try to onboard a marketer who only wants to buy in Mexico, the campaign totally fails because nobody's sending us any supply from Mexico. Do that across any dimension of the bid stream, we have a problem. And I think they're all rethinking whether QPS caps are the right approach.
Interesting. Yeah, right, because this is all about signal, right? And so if the SSPs are learning what the DSPs want. Again, what is your line on that?
SSPs feed DSPs what they eat. SSPs figure out whether it's U.S. versus Mexico, but a zillion other dimensions. SSPs figure out the kinds of impressions that each DSP will buy, and then they shape the bid stream to deliver that type of impression. That seems super logical,
right?
Unless all 30 of your SSP partners figure out exactly the same thing, and now we're sending you 30x duplication for a very small cross-section of supply, creating these giant blind spots of inventory that might be valuable to some marketer, but that isn't yet obviously beneficial to your DSP and therefore gets filtered out of the bid stream.
And then it feels like every partner just knows a little bit less of what the opportunities are, which is why I think, again, there may be more restriction. In other words...
it just fundamentally kills liquidity. Like, the whole point here is supposed to be that, like, I can have any buyer on the buy side of the market connect with any impression on the sell side. That's just not the reality. Like, in most DSPs, most impressions are just simply not available, and so there isn't liquidity. The buyer and the seller are there at the opposite end of the supply chain, but they can't find each other because the requests are being filtered out of the bid stream.
Now, let me know whether adding curation as a layer to this is the right time. You guys can say punt, and we could just mention it later. But I look at that and go, curation is one of these pieces that, one, again, it means multiple things, right? But the SSPs setting up PMPs and working on in these ways with the DSPs and so forth are, I don't know, fast passing it, or they're trying to obviously structure to move away from the open marketplace and so forth. What is the impact that this have on traffic shaping and everything we just discussed? Which one do you want to take that first? Like, I'm looking at you both. You're like looking at each other. Who goes first?
I'll take a swing at that. So I think there is a credible whiteboard drawing that would indicate that curation, like real curation, not like send a site list to an SSP, but like real runtime curation could alleviate some of this problem, because what you're effectively doing is moving some of the decisioning logic further away, further toward the publisher. And you have some company that's at the SSP layer saying, the publisher's running an auction. Whether your traffic shaping logic says you should send this to a certain DSP or not, I'm telling you, there's a buyer in that DSP that wants it. So send the request. And I think that very well could work out to be valuable here and sort of correct this liquidity problem. I also think there's like a lot of ways in which that is sort of like a very sort of like backwards way to solve this problem.
I don't really see it changing much, to be honest, because the publisher will still have a benefit of having multiple connections to the same SSP or to multiple SSPs. So the duplication will still be there, and the DSP will still have their caps. So not everything can be sent through.
That's true.
And I think it will still be very difficult to nearly impossible for the SSP from their own motivation and from their own technical or overall technical abilities to do that without risking to miss out by being too slow to get to the DSP.
I mean, the core debate, which I think we're getting at, and I don't think anybody knows the answer to, is would publishers make more money if some of their SSPs stopped monetizing their high density inventory and instead started monetizing their essentially medium value impressions? For sure, the SSP would make less money, but would the publisher make more money? I don't know that anybody's answered that question, but that seems like pretty fundamental.
I think we then get to the point of how much is the diversity of the bids getting to the DSPs improving performance?
Yep.
Because let's say we work with 10 different SSPs and they all send it with a different floor price to the DSP.
Yeah.
We definitely benefit as a publisher from that because it reduces the risk of being too high or too low by a lot, by these floor prices being very different. It of course makes it more expensive for the buyer and could potentially affect how much budget they actually put into the market. So there can be a downside of that, especially when frequency capping and other things don't work. But from a publisher's perspective, I would say it is still good, but at the same time, it has this very bad side effect of I'm not really monetizing a big portion of my inventory properly, and there's a lot of incremental lift or incremental revenue that could be generated from that bucket, and that could also make it more affordable for advertisers to buy that because they have less competition in that segment.
I think you quickly got to sort of like the second order effect there, but just to go back to the first order effect, I think you said something that's really important that we should underline. For a long time, the mental model I had was when a publisher goes from one SSP to 2 to 10 to having all 10 integrated through 3 wrappers, it makes more money because of volume bias, because it's just soliciting the DSP instead of once, 10, or 30 times. And I do think that is part of that, but I think you highlighted something that's really, really critical. It's not sending the same request 30 times to the DSP. It's sending 30 slightly different descriptions of this impression to the DSP, none of which could be claimed to be misrepresentation. They're just slight variations. The floor price is the easiest example. And I think that diversity of, like signal optimization is a big thing at the moment. How do I construct a bid request with the optimal signal? And I think what I heard you say is like, you don't actually have to figure out what the optimal is. Make several good guesses around optimal, send them all, and one of them will monetize the best. And that will be the right answer for that impression. And I do think that's pretty core to why it helps publishers to work with a lot of different SSPs.
We just had yesterday the pre-bid summit had a session on flooring, and one of the things that struck me was that it used to be flooring was how do you add multiples, how do you game the system, and what was interesting in that conversation, I think alludes to just what you just said, is more about flooring is a little bit more about sophistication and testing and trying to find the right price versus the highest price. In other words, instead of just trying to jack up your rates and try to gouge the buyer, you're just trying to give them the right signal that you value this impression. You think that there's something to this, and then I think to your point, you send that out there, and then the marketplace will help you. To me, the hard part that I'm trying to understand and figure out is, as a publisher, right? Just hearing everything we just talked about, one key thought comes to my mind, which is, I'm really ultimately trying to serve the advertiser. Okay? Like, I want business outcomes. I want them to realize...
Sorry, who are you in this situation?
The publisher.
Okay.
As the publisher...
Is that what publishers want?
I believe that's what I want. And I qualify it only because...
I mean, you're the closest to the publisher in this conversation.
Yes.
So
I look at it and go, this whole all of digital advertising, all of advertising is to move widgets off shelves, right? To sell product, right? And we can say branding and we could talk about performance and all those pieces to it. But ultimately, a actual transaction needs to kind of come out of all of this, right? And it comes down to how I organize my programmatic stack, to how I send signals from flooring to everything else. Am I really trying to sell the advertiser this impression, or am I trying to sell ad tech this impression? And what I'm hearing is I've got to make my SSP like my impression, right? Okay, there's nothing wrong with this. I'm just saying, and then they have to then turn around and go to the DSP. We've got this good impression. And some of what I get caught up in that is that when you talk about, again, like the restriction on the DSP and what they're looking for and how the SSPs react to that, means I might have something unique. I might actually have a unique ad opportunity.
But I think you're right that I've never heard you say it that way before, but I really like it. Publishers are not selling to advertisers. Publishers are selling to the supply chain. Publishers are selling to SSPs, and then the SSPs sell to DSPs, and the DSPs sell to marketers. And like every step along that chain actually has like different things they're looking for.
Right.
And so at least in the show, you know, like unless you're a publisher that can play like an outrageous long game, which I don't think any publishers can, like you kind of have to operate to serve the SSPs. Like you need to get the check at the end of the month from the SSP, and so that's your customer.
And that's how they buy, and that's their KPIs, and again, you adjust to that and so forth.
Yeah.
I think, and again, I feel like as someone that has a direct sales approach, right? When I'm doing direct, I am definitely trying to get that advertiser and agency to buy.
Yep.
Then it turns around and goes like, okay, if I can't sell it there, I'm selling it to ad tech. Mm-hmm. And they're going to do that. And again, I think that there's a part there to make sure that distinction's there, because you're playing a different game.
Look, I think it's really good framing, because if you think of the job of the programmatic publisher as selling to SSPs, now the value isn't really, I don't think, to maximize the revenue of any SSP. It's to maximize the revenue of this portfolio of SSPs. And so, you know, the A/B test that you described earlier sort of needs to go a little bit to that next level of like, not did my aggregate revenue go up by 0.5 percentage point, but sort of like, how do I make sure that as much of the revenue from this SSP is revenue I wouldn't have gotten otherwise? And I think that's where I think there's some very early glimmers of hope that publishers, by moving traffic shaping sort of like away from the SSP layer, are able to more actively sort of make sure that when they run auctions through an SSP, it's a very deliberate choice, and it's for an impression that they think they cannot sell in some other way, through a direct buy, through a private marketplace, through some other SSP. I don't know if anybody's cracked that, but that feels like a really important discipline that will evolve or is starting to emerge.
Yeah, what are your thoughts with that? Again, in terms of, because I think we're getting into the publisher piece of this, of what should they be doing with this?
There's not too much control the publisher has, or we would have as a publisher overall. Like, we can go work with, where it's possible, directly with a DSP. Ideally, we get some kind of guarantee that they will listen to everything, but at the same time, we are removing the optimization layer in between. So we might be hurting our results because we don't have all of this kind of multiple floor prices and so on, figuring out like what is the advertiser willing to pay in there anymore. As well as the other things they are basically adding, removing, and so on to the bid information. So that piece is missing. At the same time, if the DSP is only buying for one path, now frequency capping is usually working, which then is, I'm missing out on the market versus other publishers that don't do it. So it's a tricky thing. It would be the ideal scenario, but at the same time, the way it's done right now has so many loopholes that are so beneficial to the publisher that it's difficult to go that way. But then also, when from a publisher's perspective, we look at it and say, hey, like we do have one option, like we can traffic shape already from the publisher's end. And we can look at it from different perspectives. On one end, the SSP is already doing it for me. I don't need to do it. But a big difference is that when I do it from the publisher's end, I can really focus 100% on my data. I understand when it's being traffic shaped. I really know what are the reasons why it's being shaped, or why am I shaping it. And at the same time, I can improve basically my relationship with the SSP in a way where the historic information from what I'm sending to that SSP is of higher quality to them. And it doesn't always make a difference, though. So for some of the SSPs, it doesn't make a difference if I'm already pre-filtering. But for some, it does make a difference. And for the more sophisticated ones, they look at what is the historic performance of this publisher for me, to then make a decision, do I completely cut it? Or do I go to the next stage, and then how many DSPs do I include? And the inclusion of DSPs is a relationship between will they be bidding, which is a very granular, and I get a lot of feedback really quickly, but also will they be winning the impression? Now, will they be winning the impression is the very important piece here, and that is the one that makes the SSP revenue. But it is also very difficult to optimize for every single publisher, because there are not that many events happening. And I will only know if I'm missing out on something if I sample traffic and did not run traffic shaping on it. So let's say as an SSP, I don't apply traffic shaping on 0.5% of the traffic. Now, if I would be looking at 0.5% of the wins, 0.5% of the impressions of one DSP for one publisher, even a big one, this is almost nothing. So it is very difficult from an SSP's perspective to really optimize on understanding, okay, what is the probability of winning that impression? And not just going by bits. So it's also this kind of distortion a bit between I kind of have to work with bits because that is the immediate feedback I get, and I get it like 60-70% of the time, or depending on the DSP, I get it like 5% or 0.5% of the time. But the wins, they're happening like we are like 0.0 something.
You guys are both much closer to the publisher world than I am, so tell me if this makes sense. I feel like what I hear both of you saying is there are certain impressions where the publisher's going to make a lot of money. Maybe it makes 1% more or 1% less.
Yeah.
But like it's going to sell, and it's going to sell for a healthy price. And there's other impressions that are just basically not going to sell. They're going to get backfilled through Google Ads demand. And that the stuff that actually makes a difference is what's in the middle. And the place where a publisher-SSP relationship really, succeeds or fails is whether this SSP can monetize impressions that like could otherwise go unsold or could otherwise, get scooped up for a penny by Google Ads. And maybe what you're saying, tell me if I'm maybe missing your point, maybe what you're saying is the publishers that are getting really good at being able to sort of, manage this portfolio of SSPs are getting good at constructing scenarios where these sort of like mid-value impressions that otherwise might get filtered out of the bid stream and dropped on the floor are structured in a way where the SSP accepts it, thinks it's valuable enough to issue the bid request to the DSP, and sure enough, and the round trip, produces a bid that wins. Now, like that's the scenario that publishers need to optimize for. You think that's fair?
I would say that's fair. But at the same time, ideally, without missing out on the top percentage points on basically the high value inventory.
Yeah.
But it is, but really, like, even if we send a few less bid requests for those users out, the impact is relatively small.
Right. So like the publisher would want the mix of what's in the bid stream, instead of being 30x auction duplication for my most value impressions, to be 29x duplication. That really wouldn't move the needle on those super value impressions, and it creates a channel for at least some mid-value impressions to be transmitted to the DSP. And so like publishers want to shift that mix.
Yeah, but then the SSP is not really seeing much of a mid-level because they're just cutting it out early. So if I'm taking charge as a publisher, I can actually, by already cleaning out like the part that is really not interesting.
Yeah.
Because I have so much more data I can look at, and I see like the entire portfolio. I see like all of the demand partners, not just one.
Yep.
And I see every single impression that is happening, and I can fully focus on my own data. So it's very different if I can focus on my full data from all of the partners versus the SSP that can focus on 0.01% of my data, or even less than that.
I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, there's an aspect, and kind of going to something you said earlier, there's a little bit of like all or nothing. I mean, that's certainly the SSP situation, right? Either this impression has value and I want to send it, or I'm not going to get, if I don't win, I don't get paid. And that has an impact on the publisher side of this, right? They need to understand. And so one, the strategy in some cases is just going to be place as many bets across as many SSPs as I can, but also work probably with every identifier, every single thing I can do to which to give signal that, add some kind of thing to the signal that's going to do there. Kind of rewinding something you, Niels, and I have talked about, just adding signal doesn't actually help you. You have to add the right signal. So, and that's, I think, is where I'm feeling like there's this aspect that we've identified that the marketplace is working in a particular way. Everyone's somewhat acting rational in an irrational marketplace. And we kind of know that that's going to get adjusted for, right? I think that there, again, you use the word emergency state from the DSP. What that tells me is that changes are coming. And I'm just picking up some of the things that you talked about, Nils, I think are really important for publishers, is that SSP relationship. And again, understanding your inventory. So in other words, again, it used to be, back, if I really date myself, it was awesome to just get a check every month from Google and just go. And I knew it was going to be addictive, and it was. And people are starting to go like, why don't we just get more of those, right? And then header bidding, like, oh my, and that used to be the game, right? And what I'm hearing is that this level of sophistication that's required, one, is probably beyond most publishers' capabilities to sit there and be the only, I'm going to do all of this. They're going to rely more on partners to actually help them shape what they do with the SSP. I think that there's an opportunity that the relationship with the SSP and the publisher is going to evolve. I think curation has kind of started that. It just has to get a little bit better defined. And I think there's going to be some parts of this to make sure we're doing on the right end. And then there's this aspect of really trying to solve for the DSP issue, so that they start, again, the dollars start flowing where we as publishers want them to go, right? I want to win each time, every impression. I want to win, but when I know that that's not ultimately to my benefit to try to win every single one, I'm going to change my strategy, right? I'm going to start to evolve it and become more sophisticated. So I feel like we've built some conversation here on some things that we know. We have some conjecture into what we think some of these dynamics are, what's actually happening. Ultimately, I think it comes down to what publishers should do, again, is going to have to start to really engage with people and give them the insight into their own inventory in a way. And I think I like your reframing of my framing of this is about how I sell my impressions to the SSP and help them sell it to the DSP, that I think really gets interesting in terms of going like, it isn't throw everything at the wall.
Well, I think at like the most, at a real rubber meets the road level, it's not even about how do I sell to the ad tech world or the programmatic. It's how do I even make sure that DSPs know my inventory exists. Like we're at that level. Like things are so broken. We're at that level that like 9 out of 10 auctions I run, like the average DSP doesn't even know that exists. And so, that's the problem that publishers have to solve before they can even think about how do I make my inventory performant or hit certain KPIs or whatever. And so I think rubber meets the road. There's sort of 3 options. There's hope the DSPs get better at deduplicating. So DSPs do want to deduplicate, unlike the SSPs. Hope they get better at deduplicating. There's some progress there. There's like the Trade Desk has made a lot of strides in deduplicating the bid stream. But I don't know, do you want to bet your business that the others are going to figure it out and get, I don't know, that seems risky. There's build direct DSP integrations. Arguably the most important point of things like not just OpenPath, but Backstage, Criteo, Direct Bidder, and the rest, is that you feel pretty confident the DSP knows about the existence of each of your impressions and will at least consider whether to buy it. And then the third, which I really think is in the territory of haven't quite figured this out yet, but there's probably something there, is what Nils, you were just describing, which is get your hands on the wheel about how traffic shaping works and really take that internal to actively manage which auctions you present to each SSP. If that feels really hard to me, but that also feels like it has some promise and is probably something that the very best publishers figured out and isn't yet sort of mass adopted.
Nils, I want you to help us kind of take this home, because I'm feeling like we covered a lot of ground densely, and so they'll take some unpacking of this. But what I'm getting at is just that I think ultimately, as we go through and we're exploring all of these changes, and to your point about if the DSP isn't even seeing 9 out of 10 of my impressions, I as a publisher am going okay, what do I do? I think you just laid out 3 of those strategies. I look at that and go Nils, from your perspective, what testing should I be doing? What numbers really kind of matter? What are some of the things as a publisher I should start to think about? Is it dynamic ad placement? Is it anything like what are some of the things that you're seeing, and let's just say work right now?
But the same thing about different geos. If I have traffic from a country where my SSPs don't really care, and for me it's such a small percentage, why even bother running an auction for it, or maybe I just give it directly to backfill. But then I can take it a bit more sophisticated, and I can say, okay, if a certain partner isn't bidding a couple of times, maybe I should exclude them. It works. It does have some results. It's a little bit tricky because at some point in time the frequency cap resets and all of a sudden they start bidding again. Or all of a sudden an SSP is saying, oh, actually the floor price was too high, let's reduce it, and all of a sudden I'm getting bids from that partner.